Welcome to part two of Exploring Principles for EAP Materials Development and Design. I'm Scott Douglas, and I'm an associate professor in the Faculty of Education on the University of British Columbia's Okanagan campus. I'm also the series director of Academic Inquiry, and today we're going to be looking at some examples from this series focusing on writing English for academic purposes, published by Oxford University Press. So our big question for today is this. What are some key principles for EAP materials development? What is it that you need to think about when you're choosing materials or when you're developing materials and creating materials for your own learners? Today we're going to focus on three different aspects. We're going to be looking at the affective filter, learning strategies, and authenticity. So, as I discussed in part one, there are a number of reasons why we want principles for developing EAP materials. But basically, the main reason is that we're looking for a theoretical rationale for what we're doing with our students. We're looking at turning our practice into praxis by having our practice informed by sound theory and rationales. So, I've been tweeting about this, as I mentioned in an earlier video, under the hashtag EAP Materials Writing. And so if you're curious, you can check out that hashtag and see some of my tweets on Twitter. But let's look at three of these 13 principles together right now. The first one we're going to be looking at is the idea of affective filter. Earlier, in an earlier video, we talked about Krashen's idea of comprehensible input and how students learn an additional language when they hear and see messages they understand. However, if they feel upset or anxious or their emotions are running high, this can block that input. So what we want to do for our students is we want to mitigate the anxiety materials might create in the students so that we can facilitate their additional language acquisition. So what are some ways that we can mitigate anxiety for our students? Well, it's when you're looking at your materials, you want to think, well, how friendly do the materials look? How welcoming do they look? One thing you can do is have lots of white space, for example. By having lots of white space, the materials don't look too overwhelming. Other ways we can mitigate anxiety for our learners is by having materials with key visuals and diagrams and scaffolds such as tables so that students will be able to feel that they can do the task at hand. Earlier, when we talked about motivational design, we were talking about how materials are motivating when students are confident they can do them. Well, when they also have that confidence, that's going to lower their levels of anxiety and then promote their ability to be receptive to comprehensible input. The next strategy I thought we would look at, or the next principle we would look at, is that of learning strategies. So I'm also thinking, when I'm creating a unit of instruction, I am looking to see what sort of learning strategies are important for students in terms of the tasks at hand. So learning strategies, they can do all kinds of things. They can help students link new information, organize knowledge, evaluate their learning, etc., etc. But basically what we're doing is we're helping the students learn how to learn. So here's an example from the Academic Inquiry series where we've actually thought about, okay, so for each of the units of instruction, what is a learning strategy that will help students reach the outcomes for that unit? So for example, here we have the learning strategy of organizing learning with KWL charts, or what you know, what you want to know, and what you've learned. However, you don't just provide the strategy is actually embedded in the content of the unit. And so this particular unit is on Canadian regional geography. So the examples are actually going to be connected to Canadian regional geography. So here we're talking about Prince Edward Island. And so it's by unfolding a number of strategies over the course of a semester that students are going to gather together those tools that are going to help them learn how to learn. And then the final one I want to talk about today is this principle of authenticity. So when I think about English for academic purposes, I wonder, well, what is the goal of English for academic purposes, or what is it supposed to do? And for me, the materials we use in English for academic purposes should mirror and amplify what is going on out there in the rest of the university. And EAP itself should mirror and amplify the general academy. So we're looking at The things that we do in our EAP class, they should also be things that students might do in an academic setting or a social setting or a professional setting. They should be realistic in that they use authentic or authentic-like sources, such as videos and textbooks and other things that they would encounter in real life. It's about students engaging in authentic tasks for authentic purposes. And then this is then going to help once again with that idea of motivational design, because remember, one of the key points of keeping materials motivating is that they should be relevant to learners. And so authenticity is one way to build up that relevance. So here we have an example from academic inquiry where the students are looking at an excerpt from a peer-reviewed article. So looking at peer-reviewed articles is something that they do in their other classes. And so here we're doing it too, but it's focused and it's concentrated and it's scaffolded. So what are we doing? We're not just doing the same as what they're going to be doing in a geography class, but we're amplifying what they would do in order to make some of the unspoken ways of doing things explicit in our classroom. And so it's authentic. So there you go. So here are three of the ideas for today. We talked about affective filter, learning strategies, and authenticity. If you want to look at the rest of our videos, you'll see that we've been talking about 18 different principles for EAP materials writing. Of course, you can check out that hashtag EAP materials writing, where I think we've talked about 27 of these different ideas. So thank you very much for listening to part 2 of our series of videos. I really appreciate you taking the time to hear that. These are some of the references from what we talked about today.